island books today. First up, Emma Donoghue's Haven. Now, Emma Donoghue, you will remember from, well, the famous Room, and after that, Pull of the Stars, I think, was her most recent, and The Wonder, which has been turned into a film, believe it or not. Her latest one, which comes to us from Picador, is called Haven. Glorious cover, look at that. David read this one and has a lot to say about it. It's an island because it's set on one. This, I think, has Emma Donoghue, you know, I love me Irish writers. I mean, she's Irish-Canadian. I call her Irish. She sets a lot of her writing in Ireland. This reminded me quite a lot of a book by Brian Moore called either Catholics or The Catholics, which was set on one of the Skellig Islands in the Atlantic. Similar kind of feel. David says it's really an exploration of monastic life and the difficulties of, the routines of monastic living, meeting, sort of an account of that meets Robinson Crusoe. We have he becomes the prior in this story called Art, who in 17th century Ireland decides to sail down the Shannon to break away from the company of sinful men and to set up a monastery where there can't be these influences. And he takes with him a young monk called Trion and a old Cormac. And this trio wander off and set up camp, I suppose is too modern a way, but they set up on what we now recognise as, I think, Skellig Michael. And this is about how historically, and David was interested in this as he was reading it, how historically you wonder how living out on this rock in the Atlantic, how do you eke out a living? How do you get shelter? And what is your set of priorities? And who decides these? So this abbot Art, or prior Art, is he who decides. And as David says, it was hard enough living out in a sort of barren rock in the middle of the Atlantic, except it only got harder because religion became the priority, and what had to be made to the glory of God sort of, trounced anything else. So like food or shelter. She's an expert at weaving in her commentaries on this, and David felt that was almost seamlessly done without ever being preachy, and that it has an exceptionally satisfying end. So you're not only intrigued by this relationship between these three men stuck on this rock and how they might possibly have survived it, but then there are narratives that psychological build of how are they going to get on with each other, do they get on with each other, and how is this going to play out. An absolutely fabulous read. More psychological than hugely plot driven, but a lot to keep you happy. Second one up today is Limbo Loss by Robbie Arnott, Australian writer, and this comes to us from Text. This is Arnott's third, and we've had Flames and we have had The Rain Heron. We fought over who was going to read this one, myself and David, first, and David won. He says it spans the life of our main character, Ned. It starts with him at about 13, shooting rabbits and trying to sort of make enough money to be able to buy his boat. He lives with his dad and his sister Maggie, and there are two brothers, Billy and Toby, who have gone to war. So that's kind of your setup. But he jumps forward to or in between time zones between when Ned is in maybe middle age and then the end of his life. And it is one of those things that Robbie Arnott seems to do so deftly and as a reader, you trust him so much to make these leaps. I noticed this in Flames, that he asks you to take these jumps with him, and it's a little bit of a leap of faith at times, forward and backwards and around his novel's universe. and does it exceptionally well. You're completely convinced that, you're not sitting there saying, why am I in this and I wanted to be here? You trust him entirely to deliver. David said, I was convinced terrible things were due to happen, so he kind of tricked me into thinking that these things were going to happen, and then all of a sudden you're super grateful that he has actually sort of, he has tricked you. So it's this subversion of your expectations that he'll build, and then boom, you're over here. You're not where you were terrified you were going to be going. Or not terrified, but sort of suspicious. He does, as David says, he evokes both youth and that lovely Tassie landscape to perfection. And, as David says, he is set to be an Australian, one of our literary classic writers. He totally loved it. And I spent a lot of time listening to him saying, so what's he doing? Is it good? Are we going out on this boat? Is there a monster? Is this? And he was going to say, I don't know. You just got to shut up, woman, and let me get to the end of it. So dibs on it now. I'm going to read it. But highly recommended that one. And my last little island one. So we've gone from Ireland to Tasmania. See, islands. I always think of Tasmania as the, as Ireland on the other side of the world, really. It feels like it to me. Last one up today is Donal Ryan. The Queen of Dirt Island comes to us from Doubleday Penguin Random House. And as you may all know, anything this man writes, I am going to read. They are my standout favourite novels. I love my Irish writers, you all know that, but Donal Ryan has a very special place in me heart. He admits, Ryan, that he was experimenting with form. So this book is kind of built out of 500 word chapters, blocks of narrative, and each one almost stands on its own as a story, though they absolutely form part of this kind of story, complete narrative whole. And I sort of read this with, as I started, I said, I'll just read another one. And it was a bit like that chocolate. I think I'll just have one more. And I just kept having one more until I was sort of halfway through it. And, dawn was beginning to break. So, and astonishingly gripping format. If it's not just the story, it's that form made it so digestible. In terms of what it's about, we have these L-word women. They're living in Nina, which is sort of his territory, sort of. It's very definitely his territory. And we have generations of these women. We start with the widowing of one. So we have in one household the Nana, who's the older generation, and her daughter-in-law, Eileen, and they have an absolutely fantastic relationship. It's built on trust and the fact that they both loved in their different ways the same man, her son, her husband. And she has just given birth to a young baby, Saoirse. And we're kind of going to use Saoirse as the main thread, that the beginning of her life to a certain age is going to be what carries the kind of the backbone of the novel. There are two uncles for Saoirse, so Nana's two other sons who are making an absolute hames out of farming the land, and they get involved in all sorts of other shenanigans, and both, for the moment, as you started, bachelor men. And I suppose this is, you kind of feel these women are a little bit mad, but they're mad about each other. It's about being raised by women. It's about listening to women. It's about womanhood, sisterhood. It's about sex. It's about, very important Irish thing, it's about land. I mean, not that sex isn't important, but you know what I mean? It's about land and owning it and who's selling it. And we've seen that in his other novels. I mean, as you know, think about December. Your land being bought up. It's about community, and we do feel we get very attached to his communities because there are these nods to his other books, and that's like Elizabeth Strout and Anne Patchett. You get this one town or this one territory that we revisit, and we kind of feel that familiarity of being there. It's about what's expected of women and what women expect of each other. what we expect of our daughters and what we expect of our mothers. It's about judgment, acquiescence. It's about downfall. It's about how women have to do what they must, what they should do for each other, by stick together, or do they always stick together? It's about what families do in order that they stick together or don't. It's also about those very private, personal, consequences that can lead to very joyous outcomes. That is not what society tells us we are supposed to have from some of our messes. This is really a very loving book about angry, noisy, funny, very loving women, and those very shrill, jealous women who are also suffering women. And it's also about a lot of useless men. Brilliant. Loved it. That's it. Happy reading.